Thanks everybody for coming this morning. It's an honor to be here. I've just finished 45 years as a biology professor. Someone recently called me a biographer. I didn't know if that was a promotion or a demotion, but I've tried to learn a lot about John Scopes over the years. Before I start, I want to thank some people without whom I would have relatively little to tell you. These folks let me in their homes, showed me their scrapbooks, invited me to Scopes family reunions over 15 years or so. This is John Scopes Jr. Eating catfish with me in Louisiana. Bill Scopes, John and Mildred Scopes' youngest son, his home in Alabama, and a group of friends and relatives of John Scopes, starting left to right, the late, great Reverend Jerry Tompkins, who wrote a book some of you may be familiar with called D-Days in Dayton. More about him later. Lisa Renegarb, a great-grandniece of John Scopes. Susan Epperson, more about her in 22 minutes. Nancy Rose, another great-grandniece of John Scopes. Jim Presley, the co-author of John Scopes' memoirs. And ruining the picture, me. John Scopes was born on August 3rd, 1900. This is the first family photo, including John Scopes. He is right here in his mother's lap. His mother's name was Mary Alva Brown Scopes. She worked in the home. His father was Thomas Scopes. Shown here, he worked on the railroad, also helped with labor organizations. He had four older sisters. The one that will be consequential was this one. Her name was Leela. You'll hear more about her. John Scopes, as best I could tell, had a pretty typical childhood. He played a lot, and when he got old enough and strong enough, he went to work with his father on the railroad. Here he is on the back porch of their house in Kentucky, where he was born, in Paducah. Here he is in high school. As he entered the 10th grade, his family moved to Salem, Illinois. They lived in this house. It was called the Batolette House, an alleged stop along the Underground Railroad for escaping slaves. He lived about a mile and a half from where Salem's hometown hero, William Jennings Bryan, was born. William Jennings Bryan spoke at John Scopes High School graduation at the Methodist Church there. John Scopes was he registered for military service when 5 weeks after his 18th birthday. He lists his occupation as schoolboy. A rather quaint description. He then enrolled in the University of Illinois. He was a chemistry major. After his first year, he dropped out because of illness. He went home, said he hoboed around, his words, for about a year, and then went back to college, graduated from the University of Kentucky, and took a job at this school. This is Ray's Central High School in Dayton, Tennessee. This was one of two job offers John Scopes had. He was also the football coach. He coached his team to a 4-4-2 record. They had to win the last game of the year to accomplish that. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment. This one, to get to the bathroom, he had to go down outside stairs. And after he was indicted, the reporters would wait for him to go to the bathroom. And presumably to finish in the bathroom and go back. For this reason, he stayed with a friend of his most of the time when his trial was on. As I said, he was coaching the football team. Here he is in the upper left with the tie on. Here's a picture I like better, a little grittier picture of the football team. He taught science, especially physics, general science. Many people have asked over the years, did John Scopes teach evolution? More about that later. When he taught biology because the school's principal and biology teacher was often ill, as was his wife. The reason you don't hear anything about the full-time biology teacher at the Scopes trial was his wife died on the day that the trial began. She died in Knoxville, and he didn't want to come back. This is a big if the exam that John Scopes gave toward the end of his substitute teaching in the biology class, if that exam was indicative of what he taught, then John Scopes did not cover evolution per se. When you look at the exam, here it is, you can see his name up there, John Scopes is teacher. It's basically a march through the kingdoms, biologists would call that. What are the characteristics of insects? That's question number 2. The question, what are the characteristics of flowering plants? Just all the way through. He did, however, ask a question about eugenics, which was covered, presumably, if it's indicative of what he covered that. When he was indicted, the reporters were after him. They took any picture they could get. He tried to avoid them. Here's a picture of him on a Read Your Bible sign outside a temporary bathroom by the courthouse. Lots of articles talked about how popular he was with women, often closing the article with, and he doesn't have to swim alone. To get away from some of the reporters, he returned to Paducah before the trial to live with his parents. Here he is on his front porch. While he was there, his sister Leela, who I introduced you to earlier, lost her job. She was a math teacher in Paducah when she would not renounce her brother's alleged views about evolution. A few days before the trial, John Scopes returned to Dayton, went to this banquet, at which Brian famously said the trial would be a duel to the death. Here is Brian. This is all of the prosecution. On this side, here is John Scopes. If you remember some of the names from the trial, this is George Rapelier, one of the instigators. This is John Neal. Over here, this is Robinson, the Robinson's drugstore, the hustling druggist. That's him at the banquet. A few days later, there was this trial. I think you've heard of it. I'm not going to talk about it, except to say that it's like watching the movie Titanic. You watch it, no matter how much you read or write about it, he was convicted. The Titanic goes down and John Scopes was convicted. This is how his future hometown newspaper reported the conviction. John Scopes would end his life in Shreveport. He enrolled, thanks to the financial help of some journalists and scientists, at the University of Chicago. He studied geology. The scientists and journalists, they had a goal of raising $5,000. They raised $2,550, barely half of what they had hoped to raise. But he went to the University of Chicago as an honors student, but he ran out of money. Had to get a job. He applied for, he said, his words, countless teaching jobs. He wanted to be a teacher, but he could not get one. And finally took as he said, I took what I could get. Went to Venezuela, worked in a tent camp on Lake Maracaibo, at the beginning of Venezuela's oil exporting commerce. He was described as friendly, hardworking. He fit in well with his colleagues. Here's another picture of him, quite different from the innocent-looking defendant. When he turned 29 years old, his friends gathered and gave him a nice dinner with a poem called From a Rockhound to a Fossil. He got sick in Venezuela, returned to the United States for a while, but then returned to Venezuela, where he met Mildred Walker. On February 3rd, 1930, they married. This is them on Lake Maracaibo on their honeymoon. When the news got back to the United States that John Scopes had married, it got back about 2 weeks later. They were reported it like this. Quits evolution for a wife. John and Mildred returned to the United States. John re-enrolled at the University of Chicago. After again enrolling there, he again ran out of money. He left the University of Chicago. He never did receive a graduate degree. He and Mildred returned to Paducah, and John could not get a job. Applying for, he said, almost anything, lots of teaching jobs. He lamented that he couldn't get those jobs. And finally, after he could not get what he called a legitimate job, he said, I'm going to try politics. He ran for the U.S. Congress as congressman at large for Kentucky. He ran, reporters often called him a farmer, and they used this picture of him mowing the grass of his parents' lawn there in Paducah. He ran on the socialist ticket. He believed that the government, in his words, should control about everything. Commerce, energy, you name it. He did not, reporters often asked him about his trial. He wanted to talk about socialism. He had a few campaign rallies. The election was not a nail biter for John Scopes. He received 0.3% of the vote, which he later described as all coming from his relatives in McCracken County in Paducah. Despite his self-deprecating, humorous view of the election, this was a very low point in John Scopes' life. He couldn't get a job. He had a wife depending on him. He told a couple of reporters this, rather discouraging. I have no plans. I once did, but I've learned the futility of such plans. In 1933, he got a job with Union Oil. He was sent to be an oil scout in Texas. He said he forced himself to love the job. He was glad to be earning a living. Later, he was transferred to Houston and then eventually to Shreveport, where he lived the rest of his life. He and Mildred had 2 boys. Forgot one article. This was about the only newspaper article I ever found that mentioned John Scopes. He's mentioned down here that did not mention monkey trial or something else. He kept, this is his clipping. He kept this, I'm assuming he kept it because he was treated as a professional geologist and not someone involved in a long ago trial. He started a family. This is John Jr. on his father's lap, born in 1932. John still lives in Louisiana. John Jr. lives in Louisiana, followed by Bill Scopes, the late Bill Scopes, who lived in Alabama. In Shreveport, John Scopes was very active in St. John's Catholic Church, extremely active. He was a church elder. He led prayer meetings. He led all-night prayer services. This article mentioned him. In 1941, he was required to register for the draft again. He did, and again was not called into service. Meanwhile, his boys were entering public schools. Neither of them ever studied evolution. The topic wasn't brought up at their home. Bill said he didn't recall ever hearing about it. John Jr. said never brought up. And their father, despite enjoying his year of coaching in Dayton, never coached their sports teams. Both of the boys were active in sports, but John never coached them. There were problems in the Scopes home that could be traced to alcohol. Not with John. John drank a lot. I asked Jim Presley how he met John Scopes, and he said, I met him at 2 a.m. at a party in Shreveport, and John was very drunk, like everyone there. John drank a lot. He was described as a heavy drinker. I found no evidence that it ever interfered with his work. No people complained about it. His family acknowledged that he drank a lot, but there were no problems with alcohol for John. John Jr. described him as a happy drunk. The problems arose with Mildred, who the boys acknowledged as a angry drunk. Here is one of her arrests for drunk driving. Hearing the boys talk about this, it was very poignant. Their childhood was not pleasant because of the alcohol. In 1947, both of the boys were pawned off, their words, pawned off to live with Leela Scopes in Winnetka, Illinois, where she taught math. When John Jr. first mentioned this to me, I said, "Oh, you mean you went and stayed with," they called her Aunt Leela V. Aunt Leela V for a couple weeks in the summer. I said, "No, we moved there." I paused and he said, "We lived there 3 years. We went to public school there." I asked, you must have missed your parents." "No." "Did you see your parents?" And Bill said, "I saw my father one Christmas." They had a strained relationship, an unhappy childhood. I assumed that these were bad years for John Jr. and Bill. I was wrong. Both of them described these years as the happiest years of their childhood. Quotes like this: "Leela saved us. I don't know where I'd be without Leela V. Scopes." I was sitting at the kitchen table in John Jr.'s house. He had all of his children over. And John Scopes Jr. is very level, doesn't raise his voice, chooses his words carefully, speaks slowly, a very reserved guy. And he became animated when I asked about Leela Scopes. And finally, it was easily the most poignant moment of my professional career. I looked at him, and he, with a tear coming down his face, he said, "Leela Scopes was the greatest person I've ever known." John and Mildred Scopes divorced in 1953. They stayed in touch. Mildred moved a few blocks away. 2 years later, they remarried. Although John Scopes had returned to Dayton several times after his trial, when he was there, he never spoke to reporters, would not hardly acknowledge them. When a reporter was there, when John Scopes was walking in front of the courthouse, well, this article points out there was a 10-year anniversary celebration for his trial that John Scopes didn't attend. When John Scopes was noted there one time, the entire story in the newspaper was he was in Dayton and he smiled. However, John Scopes jumped at the chance to return to Dayton on July 21st, 1960 for Scopes Trial Day. Ed showed a picture of this plaque with John Scopes standing by it, an ever-present cigarette. That will be linked with cancer soon. This is one of 3 plaques that have appeared in Dayton. This one's inaccurate. It was replaced in 1994 by another inaccurate plaque. The one you'll see on Monday, at least is accurate. It's their 3rd try. John Scopes reminisced about his trial. This is in the courtroom. The person on the far left is Sue Hicks, a friend of John Scopes and a prosecutor. There's John Scopes next to the chair. This is Wallace Haggard, another prosecutor. Wallace Haggard had coached 2 years before John Scopes got there, coached the Ray Central High School football team to a winless and scoreless season. By the end of the schedule, they were also coachless. A highlight of Scopes Trial Day was the North American premiere of Inherit the Wind. Professor Larson mentioned something about it. Here it is. It was shown at a local drive-in there. John Scopes talked, or gave us a short introduction to the movie. This was the ticket in. Had to find somebody who had an empty seat or an empty trunk to get into the courthouse. This was the movie. John Scopes then did a great deal of publicity work for the movie. This shows him in Los Angeles with the director and producer Stanley Kramer. This is one of his return trips to Dayton, again smoking a cigarette in front of the courthouse. Here he is in New York City with some models that represented the best ideas about evolution at the time. Here he is addressing a crowd in Dayton. Throughout his life, John Scopes spoke fondly of how the people treated him in Dayton. He and Mildred were given a key to the city. This is the mayor on the far left, J.J. Rogers. The key to the city representing the freedom of the city of Dayton. Back home by the mid-60s, John was in semi-retirement. He was a consultant for Union Oil. He had 3 hobbies: drinking, reading. He was an avid reader. About once or twice a month, he would check out all the books he could carry at the library, and fishing. He shared a passion for fishing with his wife, Mildred. He was not a recluse. He didn't shy away from reporters. He just politely told them he didn't want to talk to them about his trial. His name was prominent on the mailbox. He was easy to find. His name was prominent on the mailbox. He did not have an unlisted number. There's a page from the Shreveport phone book. He got lots of requests, proposals to save him, business deals. The most common request he got in the 1950s was to sign this envelope. The U.S. Postal Service issued a stamp honoring the School Teachers of America. John Scopes complained in his last formal interview that people were too cheap to even enclose a stamp for him to return his autograph, but in this instance, Bill Scopes said he signed every one of these and, if necessary, returned them at his own expense. In 1965, John Scopes met this man, Jim Presley. I showed you him earlier. They produced his memoirs, Center of the Storm. He again went on did a whole lot of publicity work. He developed a strong friendship with Jim Presley. Jim Presley became one of John Scopes' pallbearers. This is Jim Presley a few weeks ago in Texarkana. This is how John Scopes inscribed Jerry Tompkins' book to him. Meanwhile, John Scopes kept up the publicity. He talked to just about anyone who would have him. High schools, churches, Lions Club, Rotary, local schools. This is him in Los Angeles on a game show called To Tell the Truth. He was contestant number 3. The other contestants on the left, that is Charles Darrow, his real name, and the one person in the middle is William Jennings Bryan. You can see this entire episode if you Google John Scopes To Tell the Truth. You'll never see a contestant toward the very end of the segment more anxious to get off of the television than he's up before they're even finished closing. Here he is. He did several speeches and television shows in Canada. This is him doing a show for the Canadian Broadcasting Company in Montreal. In 1968, Susan Epperson's case challenging the validity of a law in Arkansas banning the teaching of human evolution reached the U.S. Supreme Court, which struck down that law, which was very similar to the one in Tennessee. In early 1969, John Scopes met with Susan. Here they are holding D-Days at Dayton. This is Jerry Tompkins' book. Jerry had arranged this. He knew both of them. I asked Susan, what did John Scopes tell you? Well, we had small talk. The thing she remembered most was 42 years after his trial, he was still getting an average of 1 letter per day about his trial. When Jerry Tompkins alerted the newspaper to what had happened, Jerry told the reporter, what John Scopes started in 1925, Susan Epperson finished. On April 1st, 1970, John Scopes made his last public appearance at Peabody Teachers College, which is now a part of Vanderbilt. I don't know if the April 1st was an intentional scheduling. I don't know if there's a message there. He spoke to a full auditorium. He asked the same questions he got in almost all of his interviews. These are the three questions that trailed John Scopes ever since he left Dayton. Did you teach evolution in Dayton? What did your trial accomplish? And would you do it again? His answers for the first two questions varied over the years, maybe depending on his mood, if the reporter was polite. Did you teach evolution in Dayton? Usually he said he either did not or he could not remember. A few times he said, if I taught biology for 3 weeks, I must have taught evolution, without ever saying he did. What did your trial accomplish? This also depended when you asked him. Sometimes he said it was an important issue, someone needed to take a stand. I was a defendant that sat in the chair. Other times he said it was a waste of his time. It didn't accomplish anything. The one question he never, I must have looked at 40 different articles that asked him this question, would you do it again? Every time, emphatically, yes. It was an important thing to John Scopes. This is his last picture a couple of months before he died. This is John Scopes in their kitchen in Shreveport. That's Mildred. This is Bill Scopes' wife, Jackie, and Jackie and Bill's daughter, that is Bill Scopes, John Scopes' granddaughter. John Scopes died on October 21st, 1970. He was buried by his parents. This is his parents' grave. Leela Scopes, when she died years later, was interred beside him. It was Leela who put the inscription, "A Man of Courage," on John Scopes' tombstone.